Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining. We still have a few minutes before it officially begins, so we'll just sit tight and let people kind of trickle in here and get started in just a few moments. Okay, everyone, I think we will go ahead and get started. Molly, if you were there, if you would come on camera. Good morning. Well, good morning and good evening, possibly good afternoon, depending on where you are located, to everyone who has joined us for this masterclass on U.S. education and visas. We are going to cover everything from understanding the U.S. education system to some visa success strategies, financial planning mastery, as well as some pre-departure essentials with our guest here, Ms. Molly Witt, Associate Director of Admissions at the University of Vermont in the state of Vermont in the Northeast in the U.S. So I will take just a moment to introduce myself, and then Molly, I will let you introduce yourself, and then we will get started with some preset questions. I am Tiffany Hardman. I'm Partnerships Manager for the US for AECC. My role is to work with our university partners like the University of Vermont to talk about how we can lead students to success in achieving their dreams of studying in the United States. So today we're going to cover some kind of topics about visa prep and everything, like I mentioned at the start. We're pretty excited, and we want to make sure that hopefully all of your many questions get answered. I do believe you can use the Q&A or chat feature to list some questions as well. If that's not the case, we will have time at the end for some audience questions if you still have some remaining after we talk with Molly. So Molly, if you would, a brief introduction, please.
Great. Hi, everyone. Happy Saturday to you. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedules to spend some time with us. I'm very excited to be here with you. My name is Molly Witt. I'm the Associate Director of International and Transfer Initiatives at the University of Vermont. I've been here for 11 years, but in the field for almost 20. You may know some of my colleagues if you've been working with us for a little while now. John Kuipers, who is in charge of partnership management, and then Daria Gohel, who's based in Mumbai and has been to a number of different site visits. And I have the pleasure of working with them and helping build out our strategies for international engagement. So I'm looking forward to spending some time with you today.
Wonderful, Molly. Thank you so much. And thank you for your time and answering our many, many questions. So we will go ahead and get started. Excuse me, it's a little early here in the Eastern time zone. My voice isn't quite ready for this Saturday. Apologies. Okay, so Molly, students view U.S. education as a gateway to numerous opportunities, of course. How has the perception of U.S. education among Indian students changed in recent years? And what factors do you feel have influenced these changes?
Yeah, this was a great question. And I know a lot of these questions came from you all. So thank you for sending them in ahead of time. I think, the perception of the US education is still very strong. I think a lot of people look to it as an amazing opportunity to have their child come and earn a degree that is really well recognized throughout the world, whether it's for an undergraduate degree or graduate degree. Um, I'm sure there, as you all know, there's some things that have changed over time, and one is the idea of how my return on investment. College in the US has become more and more expensive, and the commitment to being able to pay for something that, whether it's a 4-year degree or a 2-year degree or beyond, is a significant investment for families. And so it's really understanding, is that the right investment for the family? And then, of course, this ability to take your degree once you're done with it and be able to come back to your home country or use it throughout, um, is still really well regarded. I think probably the other thing that people are aware of is just kind of this, and we'll get into it because I know there's a question about it later, is safety in the US and the perception of safety in the US, and particularly being Indian in the US. So we'll make sure to cover that in a little bit. But overall, I think there remains to be very strong interest, particularly in the graduate level work, and especially if they're looking for a master's degree, because sometimes those graduate programs can be funded, sometimes they're shorter. And so it can be a really great way to get a great education, a well regarded education, and then be able to come back home in a shorter amount of time.
Thank you, Molly. I completely agree. I think that, despite any political changes and difficulties or challenges that we may have faced in the last several years, from COVID to who knows what in the future, the perception of a U.S. degree is still very strong and still highly sought out. So we're certainly proud of that, and the numbers bear it out. U.S. universities are known for their unique attributes and diverse offerings, especially as compared to perhaps universities in other countries. So, could you provide an overview of what distinguishes U.S. universities from those that may be located in other places, particularly in terms of their academic and extracurricular opportunities?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you all know, the US has a 4-year undergraduate degree, and then for graduate degrees, it varies whether it's 1, 2, 4, or beyond. I think that ability, especially at the undergraduate degree, to come into a program that is not on a track. So they're really, the US really has this liberal arts background, um, and philosophy, even in the heart of their STEM programs. There's the ability to pursue multiple passions while you're here, and really exploration is encouraged of students. We want you to go out and explore who you are, look for that personal growth. Changing your major is encouraged as you grow and learn more about yourself and your abilities and interests. The ability to do multiple things is normal and expected. Things like engaging in things outside of college, so your clubs, your sports, internships, work. We really want our students to go out and explore everything that has to do with the US culture, not just academically, but also socially as well. And US colleges are really good at building both strong focus on hard skills and soft skills. So that ability to not just take the knowledge that you're learning, but then how do you apply it outside of the classroom? How do you build a network of people? How do you go into networking events and really excel in them, because it's not just about sitting at your desk and doing the work. It's about being a strong employee, being a strong collaborator and coworker. And so we want every student that's coming out of our education system to be able to excel in all areas of their life. So those are some differences that came to mind initially. And Tiffany, I'd be and sorry, one more, sports, I think, is one of the areas we hear a lot. Is you're able to do both your studies and be able to really pursue sports, especially if you're thinking like competitively or just socially. There's just that ability to stay really active and engaged.
Yeah, I totally agree. And what a timely topic as well with the Olympic Games having started just last night. Well, last night here in this time zone anyway. Yeah, so that's I think those are some really good points, and it kind of related to kind of the first question, maybe how things have um, or what factors still kind of influence Indian students being interested in the US are those opportunities to really dive into who they are and what they want to do, and the attractive aspect of doing research, at a university, or getting outside the classroom and really learning how to apply um, the topics that they're covering in a really practical way. We focus a lot in the US on career prep and what happens. Okay, so you got your letter, you got to campus, you're ready to start classes, and we're always looking very forward. We want you to have the experience you want to have, but also we're like, okay, well, what's next for you, and how can we best prepare you for that? So I think that that's kind of a something to think about as well. And as you said, the social aspect is huge, and that can come from sports or clubs or just getting out into the communities. It's all part of the overall, like, traditional kind of college experience here in the US. Certain academic programs are particularly popular among Indian students.
Mm.
So at UVM, or just generally, what are some of these programs, and why do they tend to be so attractive to students from India, do you think?
Yeah, we certainly see a lot of students come who are interested in the STEM fields and business, so especially in engineering, computer science, business, any form of business and related to business. I think, I can understand why, because these are programs that build very specific skill sets that lead to very specific jobs that are very well regarded as well. So I think a lot of families think like it's easy to understand the line between studying computer science and having then a job that's related to computer science, or studying engineering and then becoming an engineer. And they're not long programs either. So, if you're thinking about becoming a doctor, as you know, in the US, it's a very long track to actually be being licensed and being able to practice, and a huge price tag. But with engineering, it's a very direct line of you study this program, you are accredited and licensed to do this, and you go out and you study and apply everything you've been studying. And well regarded jobs in the US and around the world as well. So they're high demand fields, well regarded. There's a direct line between what you're studying, what you're doing afterwards. So those are the programs that we see most often, and have that return on investment directly related to it too. So you're able to get a job in what you studied.
Yeah, that's true. And I would add also that those, so just we'll touch on kind of these things a little bit later, but those STEM programs often have a longer opportunity for students to have what's called optional practical training here in the US. But it means, you can stay on your US visa and you can work at a company while still being a student. It's part of your overall learning experience. And all students on an F1 visa have that opportunity, but students who have like a STEM approved program have the opportunity to do it for 3 years, whereas the default is 1 year. So there's a lot of motivation to be looking for those STEM approved courses. One, because of the practical application and the easy way to understand how you go from learning to a career, but also because you get more opportunity to continue your path in the US and continue to develop those skills. Let's see. So the application process for US universities can be pretty complex. It can also be quite competitive, certainly depending on the level or the course that you're interested in. What do you think are some key steps that Indian students need to follow when applying to US universities? And how can they increase their chances of submitting a successful application?
Mm. Great question. This is if I could answer this in a way that guaranteed a spot for all of your students, I would be so rich. It is a complex process in the US, and it's not as black and white as other countries are because of the holistic nature of our application process. We often talk about fit, and I classify fit in three ways: academic fit, social fit, and financial fit. And I think a successful applicant understands all three of these: academic, social, and financial, says they meet all of the criteria for this, and they've researched their institution, they understand what the university does, and they understand that once they land in that university, they would fit in well with not just the culture, but the academic expectations and also the financial aspects of it. So the first thing they can do is just make sure that they're researching their institutions well. It's not just about brand name recognition, but it's about understanding the culture of the institution, what the academic programs they're interested in are expecting of them. Sometimes I ask students, like, they'll say, I'm really interested in business. And I'm like, okay, great. Our business school is AACSB accredited, and they require students to do calculus. So are you enjoying math right now? And sometimes students will be like, absolutely, yes, I love it. I'm so excited to do calculus and makes total sense. It's a data-driven program, so we need to have that depth in math to be able to do this program successfully. And other times they'll say, oh, no, 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 I don't like math. And I'm like, okay, so then business might not be the right fit for you. So let's talk about some other opportunities that are similar in nature to the program you're talking about, but don't have that strong math requirement. So knowing all of the requirements are really of a program can be really helpful to make sure the academic fit is there. But then also looking at, what is the school known for? What are the student bodies like? What students these days call the vibe of the institution or the feel of it. Um, you know, Understanding, will they be able to socially fit in once they land, is really important, because of all those soft skills that we teach, and wanting to make sure you're in a good place to be able to absorb those. And then, of course, there's the financial piece. If it's already going to be a stretch, or you don't have the ability to really pay the fees on a semester basis, this is going to be a hard transition for you. So we really don't want students to be struggling and ultimately have to leave because of financial reasons. The other thing I would say besides overall fit is stay engaged through the process. That means checking emails, logging onto your application status pages, understanding deadlines, ask questions when things are unclear. All of those kind of get logged along with the application that's on file. So we're able to stay engaged. Most universities in the US, especially those that are not highly, highly selective, are very interested in hearing from their applicant pool, interested from hearing from the students, the parents. So we love when we're able to get those questions, that they're clarifying things and following up, because it means they're really engaging in the process and taking ownership over it. So we do want to hear from students. We want to hear from parents. We especially want to hear from students. Um, but we know that parents are always going to be engaged and want to know more about the process as well. And that's fine. But pay attention to those deadlines. Make sure everything's coming in by the assigned deadlines, because there may be scholarships they're missing out on because they missed a deadline, or they may not be eligible to apply for a cycle or a program because they missed a deadline. So those are all really important.
I love how succinctly you put that together, those three aspects of fit, the academic, the social, and the financial. I think we will cover a lot in this webinar, and we already have, but I think if nothing else, if you commit those three things to memory, you will be markedly more successful than if you hadn't joined us and heard those things this morning slash evening. I really like the idea of making sure that a student understands like the whole aspect, because as you said, and in a past life, I was in an admissions office myself, and so the things haven't changed that much in the years since, but institutions look at applicants holistically as much as they can based on what they're asking for. We're looking at test scores and GPAs and things like that, but also, how are you involved in your community, and what have you done with your free time, and who are you as a person? and will you fit on our campus? That's part of it from the university side. So encouraging students to do that from their side as well in the same way. Well, what do you have to offer me academically and socially? And, can I meet those financial expectations? And we always encourage students to consider it. I think it's changing quite a bit in what we've seen with some of our partners, or just like over the years, financial transparency, the need for it, the desire for it has really increased. And so I think universities have largely gone from just putting like a 1 year cost out, to some institutions will offer like financial or like tuition guarantees. Like if the cost of tuition changes during your 4 years of undergrad, like your scholarships will increase accordingly, so that like your bottom line stays the same. So if your finances are a concern, looking into universities that are really transparent with financials can be a good way to consider it, because you're not just looking at what it costs for 1 year. You need to understand the financial commitment over the course of a 2 year program, a 1 year program, a 4 year program, or beyond. So it's important to, as a student, also look holistically at what your experience will be like. And that'll really come into play in the second half of these questions when we talk more about the visa process. So tuck that away for later. As you mentioned earlier, Molly, ensuring personal safety is a top priority for international students and their parents. We know that this is a family kind of decision, as you alluded to. So what measures do U.S. universities take to ensure the safety and security of their students? And what should Indian students be aware of regarding campus safety?
Yeah, Tiffany, this is always a question that comes up, especially as you continue to hear some stories coming out of the US. But let me just say this very clearly. In the US, on college campuses, there are two things that we are most concerned about and focus a lot of time on. One is the quality of your educational experience, and the second is around your safety and security on campus. And then the other things like how do we support you and have a fruitful experience, that's all part of it as well. But the two pillars are academic quality and safety and security. We're constantly thinking about this and how we provide an atmosphere that is safe, supportive, and can allow students to have a really enriching experience as a result of that, because that is the bedrock of everything. So let me start with talking about some things that are pretty normal on college campuses in the US, and say that we are constantly examining and re-examining how we support our students, particularly around safety. So there's some really basic things that we do for all students. And one is we promote a college safety app. So in an app, you download it. A lot of college campuses have gone away from using these blue lights that you might have heard of in the past, because they're stationary, they're old technology, and a lot of college campuses are starting to slowly remove them. The idea being every student carries a phone. So if you have the app on your phone and have it on your home screen, or at least on, very easily accessible, it can be a really easy way to stay connected with somebody. It's something as simple as like you can turn it on, open it up, and then somebody can track you while you're on it. You can also speak directly to public safety through the app. You can call for rides if you need it through that app, and it can be on campus or off campus, doesn't matter. So those are some really simple things that actually are very low cost, but very high impact for students. In fact, I have it on my phone as well as an employee. I am never expecting to need it or use it, but it's there in case I do. And then you'll also get, regardless of whether you have the app or not, timely responses through app, through text, through email, or a phone call, and/or phone call. If anything is happening on campus, there's a quick alert system. And we actually have had it happen even for things that are around campus. Like there was one time when there was a water break in one of the water lines near campus. And so we got a quick email, text, phone call, app alert that said, please don't go towards the west side of campus because there's a water main break off campus, and we'll have emergency crews working there. So please remember to go around it or take a different route. So it's everything about related to that as well. Then there's some things that you aren't going to see that happen in the background. So our campus safety and our campus police are regularly meeting to discuss what are the concerns on campus, what are things that are happening in the community, what are things that are happening in the state, and what are things that are happening nationwide. And they're often in contact with local police and federal governments as well to understand threat assessment and how they can build up support on our campus. We, once a semester, for example, we have somebody come into our office and talk about what is happening on campus. There's things obviously they can't share because obviously if they start talking about what their response is to something, then bad actors can come in and try to work against that. And since they know how we're going to react, they're going to react differently. So there's obviously things they can't tell us. Um, but we often are then hearing from them about this is what our students are experiencing. This is what we're often hearing if they're calling for help. This is what we do in those response cases. And now let's walk through your building and talk about how we can make this more secure because this is a service they offer to all of our offices on campus. So safety is something that we take very, very seriously. And it's something we want to make sure that families understand we're very safe about. And then related to this, the other thing I probably should have said very clearly at the top, I know gun violence is something that people are worried about. In I mean, almost 100% of the cases, guns are not allowed on college campuses. So you're already coming into a place that says we really want to have kind of a pure and simple experience for our students so they can focus on their academics and building those hard and soft skills. So that is not allowed. You will often see police officers carrying handguns that are latched so you can't just easily grab it. But those are things, they're more often, campus police are more often carrying tasers, but it would be unusual to see any of them ever pulling them and using them. And then the last thing I'll mention, and Tiffany, please feel free to kind of jump in and provide some context too. It's not just about physical safety, it's also about mental safety as well, because we know families are landing and experiencing new things for the first time. So there's significant support around mental health and safety as well. And I think this is something the US excels at, is looking at the whole individual and not just how do we provide safe physical space, but also safe mental space as well, balance in your life, provide mental wellness and health and well-being. So we do a lot of courses, a lot of extracurriculars that are focused on well-being and mental health well-being, to be able to balance some of the stress that comes with being in college and away from families for the first time.
That is, Molly, honestly, like one of the most thorough answers I've ever heard in response to safety questions. It's something we talk a lot about, obviously, because even domestically, parents are sending their children away for the first time in a lot of cases. And so it's not just international families that are really concerned, but it is really important to address their specific concerns because they're also sending their children overseas, far away, different time zones, things like that. And so it can be really overwhelming to even know what to ask or how to address it. So thank you so much for hitting all of those points. I want to say I've talked about this quite a lot, campus safety and the blue lights. For those of you who may not know, as Molly mentioned, they're basically like just very simple telephone poles. They have a bright blue light at the top so that you can see them really in the day or night from anywhere on campus. They're typically stationed quite frequently so that you can always be in view of typically multiple in my experience, but at least one. And essentially you go to the blue light and it'll automatically connect you with either campus police or the local police department, depending on how the campus is organized. Excuse me. So that you can get a hold of help as quickly as possible with very little effort. But this is the first time I've heard of the safety app. So that's really wonderful to hear that that's, you know, coming into the limelight a little bit more because it does make so much sense. We all have our phones on us all the time. So they might as well be a source of comfort and information and things like that. You also mentioned that there are like text messages and emails and things that go out even for like non-emergency things, but things that students should just know are happening on campus. And that's really great. I think at this point, probably all campuses do that, but I would also encourage students to consider looking for like a local or community alert system as well. So for example, I am located in the Midwest. In the spring and early summer, we tend to have the potential for tornadoes. And we will get like weather-based alerts by being located in this area to say like, hey, things could get nasty, or like make sure you have shelter nearby or don't be outside. So even those kind of larger weather events you want to hear about as well. Or, if there's been, as you mentioned, like a water main break, but if there's been an accident and a road is closed, those are the kinds of alerts you can get by being connected to the community, not just the campus. But the campus is, of course, essential and a great place to start. And I will confirm there is a huge focus on mental health in the U.S., especially at the university level. It's really something that upcoming students have demanded, and universities are rising to that challenge, really forming robust mental health care programs or opportunities for students to um, just make sure that they are experiencing that mental safety, as you mentioned, Molly. I really loved that phrasing. So lots of good ways to stay and feel safe from the inside out, from the campus, from the local community, and kind of, within yourself as well. Switching gears a little bit, technology plays a major role in modern education. You mentioned the Campus Safety app. We've talked about a number of other examples as well. So how is tech integrated into the learning experience at U.S. universities, or what tools or platforms should students be familiar with, or might they see as they join a campus in the U.S.?
Yeah, great question. And I'll name it's been a little while since I've been a student, but there are some things that I've been hearing our students talk about or ways that they stay engaged. So I can imagine just how more robust it is besides the things that I hear. Um, Something you might all be familiar with is there's often a digital platform for all students to be able to use. So things like Blackboard Classroom or Canva are all very common things that our students have access to. In addition to that, in the classroom, a lot of professors like to get real-time feedback from their students to understand if they're absorbing or understanding what they're teaching. So they might put like different polls up where students can then use their phones to choose like a multiple choice response to see, all right, if I taught this correctly, the vast majority or all of the students should be able to answer this question. So they'll put a poll up and then have the students answer it and then see what the feedback is. And, if it's not near 100%, that means they'll have to step back and take a little more time to discuss and explain things and make sure it's really being absorbed by their students. But I've also seen that professors are using a lot of opportunities to engage in different ways. So it might mean, some students do really well reading and absorbing through text, others do really well listening and absorbing that way, or just finding different ways to communicate with students. So they might have them go out and do their own research and say, like, all right, I want you to look at this topic, go find what social media is saying about it, go find what professors at other universities are saying about it, go find what professionals are saying about it, what is the media saying about it, and then come back and we'll discuss it. It might mean taking some knowledge that you've learned and pulling it together, not just in a paper, but maybe you're building a website, or they're having you do a podcast related to the content that you're learning. So you might see it just play out and having them apply their knowledge in different ways than just kind of a traditional paper or presentation that you might be familiar with. And using technology in ways that can really benefit students, but also in a way that they're really comfortable and familiar in. Tiffany, I'm wondering if you might add more.
Yeah, I think that the polling is really essential. It's also been a minute since I was an active student, but that was kind of starting to come into play during my time as an undergrad. I personally don't always love participating actively and out loud, which is an essential part of an educational experience in the US. So get ready for that if you're a little bit like me, take some time to prepare. But it's really nice because you don't necessarily have to put yourself out there, but you can see like, oh, others didn't understand this too. It's a little intimidating to be like, raise your hand. I can see, who doesn't understand, but that anonymity can be really beneficial. And it also really helps give the professor, live feedback about what they're doing, as you mentioned, so that they can adjust. I would also say that in terms of technology on campus, not only what you're using to kind of organize your own classes or systems or things like that, but the hands-on experience you can get with tech as well. I'm very lucky in my role. I have been able to visit many college campuses and kind of learn about what they have to offer. And I have been so struck by how many have such high tech equipment that you can check out and use for a project, or, if you have XYZ major and you're in this school, you have just like all you need to do is turn in your ID card, and then you can rent equipment to film a video, make a commercial, do a podcast, host a webinar, anything like that, because the assignments are also getting more tech friendly and tech based, because that's the life that we live. That's the reality we live in. And so universities have really stepped up their game in making sure that students have access to those kinds of things to really help, again, really help prepare them for what comes next for them. I can't tell you how many recording studios on college campuses, and that didn't used to be a thing, or at least certainly not as accessible. Or esports have also become quite popular. This is more of the like social side of things. So outside of the classroom, or I'm sure for some inside of the classroom, game design, things like that. There are whole, you know, sections of buildings now dedicated to understanding how video games work and how you can kind of create and play in that space. So there's no way to avoid technology in our lives. And, sometimes that can be a little stressful, but it can also be really beneficial. So I think that universities do a good job of um, providing those opportunities for students. One thing I will say here, though, and this is general advice, especially for international students coming to the US, um, the US also really values independence. And so a lot of times you have to go ask about these things, or you have to go seek them, or you have to inquire with a professor or a department, or the head of supplies or whatever, what's available to me, or go talk to the library resource director. What can I use? So you will be told about a lot of this stuff, especially at orientation, but you'll be told a lot of things. It won't all stick. So you have to feel confident. And if you want to use something, if you want to know if something is out there, you just have to find the person to ask, and someone will point you in the right direction. The staff at universities, they are there to help students have the best experience they can. They love it when you come up and ask questions about what resources are available to you, how you can utilize something, how a specific piece of equipment works. So they want to make sure that you're having the best experience, even when that means, explaining how to check out the camera or whatever to film for your class project and things like that. All right, so transitioning from the educational system you've always known to a new system can be quite daunting. So what types of support systems do U.S. universities typically offer to help Indian students adjust to their new environment, both academically and socially? We've kind of talked a little bit about this, but if you have any more thoughts to add, Molly, we're eager to hear.
Yeah, I mean, and then the other thing to add on top of what you've already learned about is a lot of these support systems exist, as Tiffany said, and because there is that independence and expectation of independence, it might mean they exist, but you need to take advantage of them, and you need to take that first step to walk into the door and reach out and ask for them. But these are things like your writing centers, your tutoring centers. We even have a life skills center that's able to assist students in how do you balance these new things that you're dealing with. And even for US students who are familiar with the educational expectations because they've lived the high school experience here, the extension into college is not the same. It's not the same expectations, but similar culture, so they're going to understand some of the basics of it. But the balancing a new workload and kind of self-motivation and how do you figure out how to move through all of these different things can be a really big challenge. So we offer classes on how and one-on-one connection, not just not just life skill classes, but come in and talk to somebody about, okay, what are your 5 classes you're doing this semester? What are the expectations within each of them? What do you have for expectations outside of class? What are your family obligations? And now let's talk about how we prioritize those things and get the things done you need to do. And just talking through what that looks like, in addition to the mental health support as well. So, a lot of this we have talked about already, but it's all about trying to build community with you, build support systems that feel comfortable to you so that you know as you're transitioning, it may be hard, but you're not alone. And these exist all throughout campus. They exist in our clubs, sports, and organizations. And then in our residence halls, you'll have that support as well through the resident assistants who are there to help build programming, but also kind of be a first line of support should you need a little extra care. And they'll be the first ones to notice it outside of your classes, besides maybe the students' immediate friends. So a lot of systems are in place to help just support students. Um, if they don't leave their room, if they don't open their mouth, it's going to be a little bit harder for our systems to pick up on when they need that help. So again, like being able to say, I'm not okay, or I don't understand, or I need help. Those are all things we expect out of our students to be able to do so that we can jump in and offer all of these things that we do to help support students.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I'll clarify in case anyone is unsure. A resident assistant is it's typically an upperclassman, but a fellow student or perhaps a graduate student living in an undergraduate residence hall or things like that. When I was in school, we had like one per floor who was responsible for kind of like creating a positive social atmosphere and also serving as a resource. So we could go ask our RA anything from where is this building on campus? I don't know how to get to my next class, to like, I'm really struggling and I need help with writing or my math courses, or just I don't know what to do, or my finances have changed and I'm not sure how to address it. Once again, while there are unique aspects to being an international student in the US, you will find camaraderie amongst even domestic US students, because many of them are on their own for the first time as well. And they're having some of the same struggles, not all of the same struggles, but many of the same struggles. You mentioned, Molly, sort of like the social support network that students create kind of through their clubs and organizations. I'll also state that there are I would hesitate to say, a guarantee across all universities or colleges in the US, because we have thousands of them, but the vast majority, and certainly most that students from India or, from outside the US would be considering, have international student groups established, often based on sort of like region or country of origin. So at every institution I've ever visited, there's an Indian Student Association, for example. And so you can work with and talk to students who have been through much of the same experience and coming from much of the same experience that you have, and they can help direct you as well. In fact, many of them have like active WhatsApp groups that students can join once they're kind of committed to an institution, things like that. So there are lots and lots of ways to get that social support, but it is crucial that students understand that it's there for them. And as Molly mentioned, a lot of times you at least have to take that first step of just telling someone, I need help, or this is my problem, or I'm not sure about XYZ, because the answers are there, the support is there. Sometimes you just need to take that first little step to find it. All right, so let's see, moving on to kind of maybe the most intimidating part for students is the visa process. So the second half of the conversation will focus on what that looks like for students, how they can best prepare for obtaining a US visa. We've touched a little bit or alluded to some things, but we'll start with some specific questions now. So thorough preparation can make a real difference in the outcome of a visa interview. That kind of goes without saying. But Molly, what do you think are some of the best practices for students to prepare for their visa interview, and what resources can assist them in the process?
Yeah, so just to start with, because a lot of the next few questions are related to visa and support services related to visas. And I just want to name first off that we have professionals on each of our campuses that specialize in immigration services that include providing the I-20 information and documents, and then how you stay on a valid visa. I do not have the government approval to advise specifically on this, so I'm not a designated school official, but I could certainly speak generally to what is out there and known already, and then some things that we've witnessed as well. So just to start with, I am not what we call a DSO, not a designated school official. But to start with, but visa interviews tend to be very short. They may only ask a couple of questions, or they may ask you more than a few questions. But generally, there's a large quantity of people they need to get through in a very short amount of time. So they're trying to be very concise, and they want you to be concise as well. Before you head into your interview, make sure that you understand what is being required of you to bring with. Make sure you have everything with you. It doesn't hurt to bring a little bit more. You should dress appropriately, speak confidently and clearly. And because these will be Americans who are interviewing you, we tend to be a culture that expects eye engagement, smiles, positivity, being able to sort of like answer confidently and clearly as soon as you're asked something. We don't love overconfidence, so don't overcompensate by speaking too long because they really do need to get through this process quickly. Um, it's helpful if you understand your university really well, your program of study really well, because there may be questions about that. And there's some things coming up that we'll dive into more late in a little bit. Answer clearly, be positive, uh, answer quickly, but make sure you've really thought about what are some questions that could be asked. You can work with AECC members to talk about what are the types of questions that I may be asked based off of the program I'm studying, undergrad, grad programs. Masters and PhDs will have different types of programs, questions as well. So knowing what might be coming your way will be a really helpful thing. So be prepared for what they may be asking you. And what they're also very interested in understanding is, can you afford to be here? And what are you doing after you graduate? Because it's all related to that F1 student visa process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I, again, in a past life, I did serve as a DSO. So I was able to issue I-20s once upon a time. And I'm going to warn you all now, the second half, these visa questions and answers, I'm going to be really repetitive because I want you to take away like kind of a few key things. And Molly, you really did a great job of kind of, touching on those as well. It is an interview, so you want to be professional, you want to be prepared. And I really appreciate that you provided some context about what that means speaking to someone from the US. That's really helpful. As you mentioned, our AECC counselors are available to help students with this process. It's actually part of our sort of wraparound services in terms of how to study in the US. Visa prep is a really important aspect of that. Our offices will help you do like mock interviews or just make sure that you kind of understand what to expect as best you can. Each interview is individual, and each consular officer is an individual. So you don't want to over practice, or as Molly said, you don't want to be overconfident. Kind of go too far in one direction, but you want to, and this is the thing I'm going to repeat, you want to know your story. So the questions that you might be asked are going to be, as Molly mentioned, like, why did you pick this program, or what's so significant about this institution to you? And knowing why you've made those choices and why you want to study this at this location is really, really important to your overall success. So as Molly mentioned in the first half of our conversation, academic, social, and financial fit are going to come up in your visa process and your visa interview as well, because that's part of what the consular officer is going to be assessing. Their main priority is you have applied for a student visa, and it is my job to make sure that that is your honest intention and you don't intend to do anything that you're not allowed to do in the US while on a student visa. So you need to prove to the consular officer that you are a legit student, you are going for academic purposes, you want to obtain the specific degree you've applied for and been accepted for from the specific location that you have chosen. And so knowing your story, knowing why you've made the choices you've made is critical to your success. And as Molly mentioned, these interviews are quite short. You may not have a lot of time in front of a consular officer. So you want to be able to not be over practiced, but be really succinct in your answers. It's important to kind of practice with others to get your jitters out and to make sure that you may know your story internally, but knowing your story and how to express it succinctly is sometimes a different challenge. So practice with friends, practice with aunties, practice with our AACC counselors in our offices, and make sure that you have worked through any of those silly little mistakes that you could make by kind of answering some of these questions for the first time. There are also a number of resources on YouTube, or I'm sure in student channels, that will kind of give advice about how to prepare or what questions might be asked. Again, you don't want to over prepare for one particular question because it might not be asked. You don't have very long, but knowing your story will help you get back to why you're doing what you're doing, why you've chosen what you've chosen, how you're going to finance your decision. That's really critical. And you'll be able to kind of tackle any question they throw at you if you keep that at the core of your preparation. I also see that we're getting quite a lot of questions in the chat right now. I promise we will have some time to go over those. A few of them I think we will address as we're just kind of having these visa questions coming up now. But if we don't, I'll go back through the chat once Molly and I have finished our portion and make sure that we address those. So thank you so much for submitting your Qs, and we will provide some As in time, don't you worry. Next question, and Molly, I'm not sure if you're having tech issues or anything. I'm going to pose the question, and if you're unavailable at the moment, I will also answer it. So how does academic performance impact a student's visa status? And what should Indian students do if they encounter academic difficulties?
Yeah, great question. Are you able to hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So a lot of this kind of goes back to some of those things that Tiffany and I had mentioned just before is so first and foremost, understand your study plan, understand your university choice, why you chose that institution, understand the academic expectations out of the program that you're planning to be a part of. You need to be able to discuss your finances, where they're coming from, how you're being funded pretty easily and pretty quickly. Um, and then understanding what your postgraduate plans are once you finish your education. What are you doing then? The goal of an F1 student visa is you come, you get educated in the US, you take your education, and you go back to your home country to apply it. So that's really what they're looking for is they don't want to be talking to somebody who is really just using this for immigration purposes and does not plan to leave the US. So there's a few different ways they can get at these areas. So they might be asking questions like, why are you going to the US? What do you plan to specialize in? What is your major? What do you do for a living? Particularly if you're looking at a grad program and you've had professional experience already, they're really interested in understanding why now? What are you doing already? And why are you planning to come to the US for an education? Because they want to see that you're going back to use it and apply what you've learned. They may want to understand why you're coming to the US and not looking for another country like Canada or Australia. Um, if you've done your research, they might ask questions about like how much does it cost to go to your university? How's it being funded? They want to try and get at that idea of immigration by asking, do you have any family in the US? Where do they live? What do they do? Because they might be thinking, all right, if you're going someplace where you have a lot of family, there's a good chance you're not going to come back. And really, you're not there for the intent of being there for your education, which is the primary F1 responsibility. Um, they'll want to understand, will you be going home over the holidays? Do you plan to return after your studies? Are you hoping to stay in the US is kind of a trick question. So if you're planning to stay in the US, that sounds like immigration purposes, that you're really coming to the US to migrate there. And they might ask a simple question like, why should you be given a student visa? So you can do a lot of work with AECC to prepare for these types of questions. Go and talk to a counselor, work it through. I love, Tiffany, the way you said, go and practice. Because if you go in and this is the first time you're trying to answer some of these questions, it might sound like you don't know what you're doing. And it might be a red flag. Well, we say a red flag for an officer to say, I have concerns. If they're not able to answer this right now, I don't think they're coming for educational purposes, or I don't think they're going to plan to return home. And those are some of their biggest concerns about granting an F1 visa.
Yeah, that's so true. And just to kind of take a step back, Molly, you alluded to quite a lot of this, but for those that may not be familiar, there are two types of visas when coming to the US. There are immigrant visas and there are non-immigrant visas. Immigrant visas mean that you are coming with the intent to stay, and non-immigrant visas mean that you are coming for a purpose temporarily. And the F1 visa, the student visa that most of you looking to study in the US will be seeking and will need to obtain, is a non-immigrant visa. And this means, as Molly said, you have to essentially explain to a consular officer that you don't plan to stay in the US. You are going for your studies, and then you plan to return to your home country. Um, and it is the what we call like the burden of proof is on the student in that moment to demonstrate to the consular officer that they do not intend to stay in the US, that they are truly planning to go for temporary purposes for studies to obtain a degree and then to return home. And this is the biggest thing that consular officers are looking for, because if you can't demonstrate non-immigrant intent, then you are not eligible for an F1 visa. That being said, and I know maybe it sounds a little intense, a little scary, I just want it to be clear, but you when you have your I-20 in hand, that's the document that allows you to apply for an F1 visa. You'll get that from a university once you've been admitted and met their criteria. So once you have that in hand, you are eligible for a student visa. You're going in having proven up to a certain point that you deserve to come to the US, that you have warranted, the admission letter and the I-20 from the institution to apply. So it is not up to the consular officer to determine your academic eligibility, for example. What they're trying to ascertain is your immigration eligibility, if that makes sense. So as we're kind of leaning on knowing your story and having your financials in order and understanding why a consular officer might be asking the question that they're asking, because as Molly mentioned, they might ask you, like, do you have family in the US, and are you planning to go to school near them? It's a potential red flag if you say, like, oh yeah, I've got huge, numbers of family members who live in this part of Texas, and that's the university I'm going to, and things like that. But that doesn't mean it's an automatic no. What you need to do is explain why that kind of doesn't matter for what you're trying to do. Or it may matter. It may be part of your financial plan. Perhaps you are going to live with family so that you can save money and afford the degree that you are seeking out. And why do you want this degree? Be ready to explain that, or be ready to address that, so that, again, your whole story makes sense. No, I'm not going to immigrate and live with Auntie forever. I'm going to live with her temporarily to save money so I can afford the program that will best set me up for the career I want back home. Those are the kinds of questions behind the questions you need to be ready for. And once again, the consular officer is not determining your academic eligibility. So if you've encountered academic difficulties, or you don't have the highest marks, or there is perhaps a blemish on your transcript, it's not up to the consular officer to determine um, if that means you deserve to go to the university. You already have the admit letter in hand. You have the I-20 in hand. You have already been determined to be academically eligible. You may, however, want to be ready to explain, why you have a failing mark, or why you have backlogs or things like that. Oftentimes in an admission letter, you may have some level of conditional admission. So perhaps you've entered a program and they say, well, we really want you to have, this kind of grade in this course, but it's the only thing you're missing academically. So you're admitted if you agree to take this course your first semester. And if you understand that process and how and why the university made the decision that they made, you can talk about that if it's something that needs to be addressed in your visa interview. But it's important that you understand how and why an academic difficulty may or may not be an exception for the pathway that you've chosen. Same for like ESL coursework. If you happen to need a little more sprucing up on your English skills, there are often conditional admissions for that. So you can explain, well, I didn't quite score high enough, or I need some help with like uh, reading comprehension in English or something like that. And so before I can take academic courses, I have to take a few ESL courses. But knowing and understanding that and being able to state that the university made that determination and they are responsible for determining your academic eligibility is going to hopefully alleviate some of those concerns that you might have. So let's see, visa interviews can sometimes include unexpected or challenging questions. We've kind of touched on some that maybe you wouldn't necessarily have thought to prepare for, but Molly, what do you think is the best approach for students to handle the unexpected or difficult questions that they might face during an interview, even if they've prepared and everything like that? How should they remain calm and composed and address those?
Yeah, a couple thoughts. One is, yes, definitely remain calm and make sure you're always welcome to ask them to repeat the question if you're unclear of what they've asked. Uh, Ultimately, what they should be asking about is this tying back to the F1 visa requirements. So if it sounds like it's unrelated to that, you can always come back and say, I want to answer this as it relates to my application for receiving an F1 visa. So I'm going to answer it through that lens. And so if it does feel like it's unrelated, just make sure you're bringing it back to the purpose of this F1 visa application. It'd be unusual for a visa officer to deviate and ask questions that are unrelated to the visa process. But they're it's their purview, it's their world, they run it. Um, Ultimately, they have a lot of people they have to get through, so it'd be unusual for them to veer away from that. But always bring it back to the F1 process of your university, your program, your funding, and your outcomes. What are you doing after you graduate? And those are really the areas you need to focus on and make sure you're answering specifically.
Absolutely. And certainly remaining calm and composed is critical. Take a deep breath. If you get a question you're not sure how to answer, as Molly said, you have the right to ask for clarification if you didn't understand a question. So be sure you understand the question that's been asked. And there shouldn't really be any gotcha questions. As we've said, they go through so many of these. You have very little time. They're not trying to trick you. They're they're trying to do their due diligence. They're trying to do their job. So their job is to make sure that you intend to go and be a student, and that is all. Excuse me. So if you are prepared to answer questions and to bring them back to the original purpose of the conversation that you're having with the consular officer, um, you should be you shouldn't be too surprised by anything that you hear, and you can always pivot a little bit to say, well, this is how it relates to the visa that I'm asking for. I really love that advice, Molly. And as a reminder, interviews do not typically last long. So if you know your story, why you're studying what you're studying, why you picked the institution you did, and how you're going to finance that, you should be ready to answer any question that they pose to you. That being said, as we have mentioned, it is an individual experience. It is up to the consular officer what they ask and when and in what order. Also, different consulates may have different, they may have like a slightly different list of what is required to bring to your interview. So as you are preparing for that, as you're signing up for that, make sure that you review like your confirmation email or, whatever they have on their website after you book the interview so that you have everything that you need, because you can be rejected for missing paperwork. And that's a really, really easy thing to avoid, just making sure that you have everything that's listed. And as Molly said, and then some. It it won't be a problem if you have documents that they never look at. It'll be a problem if you have a document they want to see and you don't have it. So all that being said, some of the questions might be unique. Molly, have you ever had any questions that you're aware of or that students have mentioned or encountered that kind of surprised them from their visa interviews, and maybe how you might have suggested that a student prepare for that kind of question?
Tiffany, it sounds like you have DSO experience. I wonder if you have some examples that you can point to.
Yeah, I don't actually think that anyone ever came to me and was like, this was such an odd question. And I used to work in an office that employed international students as well, so they could work part-time in our office on campus. And I like at no point have I ever heard from a student like this was a total out of nowhere. I didn't understand it at all. But to reiterate, as we've said, you may need to be prepared to go in depth. So you may get a question like, well, why would you choose to study this program at this institution? And if you have really done your research, and once you're committed to a program and to a location, you can learn more, you can dedicate more time to learning about like the specific faculty maybe that you would have courses with, for example. So if you're able to really go in depth, that will just show how serious you are as a student. You may say, well, this program at, this place has a faculty member that has done research in XYZ, and I'm really interested in learning more about that. Or I know that they have students that they do research with, and I'd eventually like to be one of those students. And so if you're really, really familiar, not only with just the quick elevator speech version of your story, your narrative, and you can really provide details, you might see an opportunity to mention those if you feel like you're getting a question that you're not quite expecting. But I would say for the most part, again, they're not trying to catch you in a trick or anything like that, but they may ask something really specific. So I would say that's kind of the most maybe unusual or unique kind of question I've heard back from a student. But as you are preparing kind of how you want to talk about the decisions you've made and why, really getting in depth from like why this university, why this location, why this program, why this coursework. A lot of that stuff is available online, or you could be in communication with a staff member at the university who can help provide some details that might really help you feel confident in, again, being able to share your narrative and your reasons why you've chosen what you have. We have just a couple more questions here. We'll go through quite quickly, and then we'll take some of the questions in the chat. Thank you again to those of you that have written in there. If you haven't yet and you have a burning question, please feel free to drop it in. Molly and I will address those after these last couple. So we've touched on this a bit. Financial stability is a key concern for visa officers. They want to make sure that you have the funds and the understanding of how you will pay for education. So how should students address questions related to their finances? Any key points that they should highlight? We've touched on this quite a bit, Molly, but anything you'd like to add or reiterate here?
Yeah, I think you are going to be expected to bring your financial documents with you. That will be one of those core requirements that every embassy or consulate is going to ask for. So make sure you are bringing something that outlines your ability to pay. Make sure it's easy to read. It should be in English. Understand who's supporting your education and where the funds are coming from. Understanding the ins and outs of your financing will be really key in being able to clearly speak about your ability to pay. And, even if you're getting funding from the university, a lot of PhD programs, for example, are fully funded by the university. Understanding the funding source, if it's a grant fund or if it's coming from another source, can be really helpful in being able to explain it. And then being able to provide that documentation that is very easy to read can be very helpful. They really ultimately want to know who's going to be paying your bills, because in the end, they don't want you to be coming to the United States and have the inability to be there and rely on our support networks that are really designed for US citizens or permanent residents that are paying into our taxes. So if you're pulling resources from services that are meant for US citizens or US permanent residents, that's where they're a little concerned about, oh, you're not actually coming here for educational purposes. So just be prepared to answer those questions, have the documents ready, have multiple documents if you need to, all in English, also that it's easy for the embassy officer to be able to understand.
Absolutely, Molly. And being able to articulate that again succinctly and thoroughly is really critical. So knowing where your funding comes from and why that's the right choice for you. Perhaps it's family funding, perhaps it's personal savings, perhaps it's a loan, and you've decided, okay, I will take out this loan because the return on the investment of a US degree is really important to me, and I really believe in the value of that. It's also one of the questions that might feel like a gotcha question, but makes sense if you think about it in context, might be the consular officer might ask you something about like if you have financial ties to your home country. So like, do you own property, or do you have a business here, or things like that? What they're trying to understand is if you have financial assets or ties in your home country, to them, you're more likely to come back after your degree. So again, it goes back to that proving non-immigrant intent. And so you may feel like, why do they care if I, own a home, or if I rent, or if I have a car, or whatever? And that's kind of the question behind the question is, do you have more proof of the intent to come back and to leave the US after your degree is completed? So that could feel like a gotcha question, but if you understand the purpose of it, it really makes a lot of sense. Last question here, and then we'll get to the chat. Visa denials can be a major setback for students. I know there have been some visa denial questions going on in the chat, so hopefully this will be helpful, although we'll address specifically if not. So Molly, are you aware of any common red flags that might lead to a visa denial, or steps that students can take to avoid these issues, or do you want me to weigh in?
I can start with just some really basic things, and then I would really love for you to jump in. A
Sure.
visa denial is an individual decision that's made. So there's no one hard and fast rule that says if like this is why somebody's denied. So and in some cases you may never know, but uh, often it is a student who's unprepared, unable to speak clearly, unable to articulate why they're a strong candidate for an F1 visa. Um, and so those are some of the most basic things, a lot of what we talked about before of being prepared, having your documents that are required of you, showing up and looking appropriate because it is an interview, and then being able to answer the questions thoroughly and succinctly can can all be reasons why somebody isn't offered a spot. But Tiffany, jump in.
Absolutely. So yeah, essentially having all your, we have a phrase in the US in English, all your ducks in a row, meaning you understand everything, all your paperwork is ready, things are good to go, you feel good, you're prepared, is the best way for students to avoid being rejected. So most common rejection reasons for student visas are, as I mentioned, missing paperwork. Easy to avoid. You should never have that as the reason that your visa was rejected. And if you were rejected during your interview, there should be some kind of correspondence that indicates like a code. It's just like, it refers to like the legal code in the US of like what criteria you didn't meet. So one of those is for missing paperwork. So you should never ever get that. You should go in prepared. Um, but not proving sufficient financial support is another common reason that has a specific code. Not proving non-immigrant intent, that's probably the biggest one. And all three of these like major reasons or common reasons are entirely preventable. Know your story. Um, know your academic, social, and financial fit for the university and the program that you've chosen. And you should be able to avoid any of those three reasons. Now, there are several other reasons a visa may be rejected, but you should get a code that will tell you maybe not the specific question you didn't answer, or way that you didn't sound confident, but it'll tell you at least the rejection reason, because the consular officer has to like log that as part of the job. So there are ways to avoid certainly those most common ones. And again, not only are they preventable, but by working with like ACC counselors, you can really prepare for those and make sure that you're not going to land in any of those unfortunate situations. So we've got a few minutes left here still. I will go ahead and get to the chat. I know that Molly and I were weighing in throughout as we could. It's a little hard to balance all of it. Um, but we
Tiffany,
have,
while you're looking through that, I want to just add, we've mentioned it a couple times now. One, before you go in for your visa interview, practice with someone, practice with a professional. This is where AECC can really shine and help you through that process. If you do go through the visa process and you are denied, go and talk to AECC. They can help work through it. Go back to the university where your I-20 is issued from and talk to them as well. So between these two resources, you should be able to get um, more information about how to do a second interview and hopefully how to show up in a way that is more successful for the second time through. Typically, after a second visa appointment, if you haven't gotten it, and you were denied a second time, there's something else going on that we not might not be able to advise around. And so it might be something in your background check that was done. It might be something that's completely unrelated, but typically after a second one, we're less, at least on the US university side, we're less likely to try and help you through it because it's something we can't navigate anymore.
yeah, that's a really good point. And while our counselors in our offices can help you through a lot, if there are certain codes that you receive, it's best for you to speak with like an immigration lawyer or an immigration professional. There is a lot that we can help you with, help you avoid certain problems, help you understand maybe what went wrong and prepare for a second interview to be successful. But ultimately, there are some things that are simply out of our hands. But assessing that is part of a conversation that we can have in our offices. So we do have some questions here that I feel like we've answered. How to convince a visa officer for my visa. So we covered that in the whole second half. But essentially, your takeaway is know your story, know your academic, your social, and your financial fit. That is the key to success. Unfortunately, it looks like one of our audience members was recently rejected for a visa. So sorry to hear that. You should be able to locate somewhere in some of the rejection information that code. You can Google that. You can look that up. You can take it to an ACC counselor and say, well, this is why I was rejected most recently. How can I overcome that challenge? And if it's one that we can help you with, we absolutely will. If it's one that we suggest you seek external advice, we will advise you in that direction. So let's see. How to convince the officer for the visa. Again, I feel like we've covered that pretty thoroughly and you have a pretty succinct takeaway. So hopefully this has been really useful for you all. Does CGPA really matter for PhD admissions? Nishant, I think that would depend on the program and the institution. PhD admissions are a little bit different. They're really quite individual as compared with some other programs. Typically, academic record is one of the most important parts of any application you would be submitting or any program you're being considered for, but PhD admissions are much more individualized. And so even if you have perhaps not the best CGPA, if you are in communication with the like PhD advisor or a program director, and they've made clear that like, oh, that's not a problem, or oh, we see that your GPA was lower because of this class, and that's not really related to what we're doing. So those conversations can be kind of individual. And in terms of the visa process, if you have had those conversations and you understand maybe why an academic exception was made for you, being able to articulate that is really important. Molly, any thoughts here?
Yeah, the word individualized, when you brought that up, I was like, oh gosh, that is exactly what a PhD program is. It is about the professor that is doing that level of research and work and finding the individual who matches what they want to do. You are obviously going to go off and do your own research to be able to earn that PhD, but ultimately it is such a one-to-one match between the professor choosing you because of your background, because of the courses you've done, because of the letters that you've written and the essays you've written about what you're planning to do. It is all so individualized. So if you are offered a spot at the PhD level, know that you have really risen to the top of that professor's pool and they want you for that specific reason. But you should be able to articulate that really clearly
Mhm.
because of the research you've done to apply into that specific program.
Absolutely. And we also have a question here about how many years can a student study, or sorry, can a student work after completion of study PSW? So post-study work is allowed. We kind of alluded to this early in the conversation. We call it CPT, or OPT is the post-study work aspect. CPT you do while you're still getting your degree. That's for like internships or externships. But OPT is typically the big one that students are curious about or making sure that they understand it. Any student that has an F1 visa has the opportunity to do 1 year of OPT, which is the post-study work, while still legally in the US as a student. Students that have a what's called a STEM designated program, and you can look that up online as well, or you can go in and speak with our counselors in an AECC office. There are certain codes that are attached to each program. You'll see the code on your I-20. Typically, universities are really upfront about which of their programs um, is covered under the STEM designation and which are not, but you can always look at the code to see. And if you are in one of those programs, you have the option of doing up to 3 years of OPT. So that's a big part of why those STEM programs are so important and so highly sought. After OPT, you do not have any legal option to remain in the US on the same US visa in the same program to continue working. The point, again, of the student visa is that you do not have immigrant intent. You are coming to do what is allowed legally within the rights of the F1 visa holder, and then you are going to go. So there are different paths to take after that, but you need to understand the parameters and the limitations and the opportunities that come with being a student on an F1 visa. Anything to add here, Molly? Sorry, I'm scrolling through I'm continuing to scroll through the chat. It looks like we were able to answer some questions. There's quite a lot of chat going on in here, actually. So this is great. I realize we're kind of at time. Um, Molly, do you
There
still
is
have a
one
few minutes or
question.
do you need to go?
Yeah, no, I'm okay to
Okay.
stay. I was just going to mention there is a question that we got through the Q&A function,
Oh, all
just
right.
asking about, it's great to know about the homely or friendly environment in the US education system that we provide here, but also wanting to know how exactly is the culture among the students? How do students interact between each others, between the students, get the diverse pool of culture between students? Because I think that networking is just as important as the education as a whole. And so great questions and kind of observations of what you've learned about being in the US and on a college campus. This comes back to the fit of the institution, what the student body is like, and what they kind of are teaching and expecting of their students on that college campus. I'm going to use my institution briefly as an example, the University of Vermont. We're in the Northeast, and we have a strong focus on sustainability and social justice. And so you're going to see a lot more of our students engaging around those topics. Whereas at another institution, they might have a much stronger focus on just STEM, and that's absolutely the case on mine. There's a strong STEM focus, but ultimately, kind of the student feel is these are some things we really care about. So we're going to spend more time kind of focusing on them in our clubs and our sports and our activities. And you're going to see kind of a theme throughout the campus and the student life. Whereas other institutions might have very different feels. Like you might see more sororities and fraternities active on campus, or you might see a stronger focus on philanthropy, or you might see a stronger focus on sports. So ultimately, it's understanding what is the kind of social fit of that institution to see if that's something that you're really interested in. Because if it is a religious institution, for example, and it's a religion that they value and they teach through the curriculum, and there is an expectation to be engaged in that religion, you might feel like that's not exactly what you're looking for out of the culture of the institution you want to be at. So knowing that ahead of time is really important and goes back to that fit to make sure that when you land on the college campus, you can be as successful as possible. Tiffany, what would you add?
I think that really is quite thorough, Molly. I really appreciate the depth of that. And again, it goes back to, here's your key takeaway: know your story, your academic, your social, and your financial fit. This is the social fit. So the student culture is, as we kind of mentioned, quite robust. There are a lot of opportunities for students to get involved. And especially if you're feeling a little homesick, there are student organizations based around, culture, language, religion, home country, or home region, depending on how many students maybe are on campus. So it is really important to get involved in those and to understand what your university has to offer. And you can get a sense of that, of course, from the website or from conversations you've had or things you've seen online about student life, that will help you understand that kind of going in, or before you're an active student. But once you're on campus, really dive in and explore, because you're going to be living there for 2 to 4 years or more. And so it's really important that you establish that your own social network, essentially. We had another question in the chat about a tourist visa. Unfortunately, we're not really equipped to advise on that. The question was regarding if you could do the interview in any language. I'm not really sure, so I'm really sorry I'm not able to weigh in on that. It's not required to speak English to come here as a tourist, so I would imagine it wouldn't be, but I can neither confirm nor deny that, unfortunately. We're really focused quite a lot on the student visa, the F1 visa, not as well versed in the B visa, unfortunately. We had a question here from Karan, who was denied the visa quite recently, asking how we can help. Again, go into our offices. I'm not sure where you're located. It looked like maybe you said your interview was in Delhi. We do have an office in Gurgaon, so definitely reach out to our counselors there, and they can help you through this process by taking a look at, again, like the rejection code, which you should have and bring to that conversation, and they'll help you the best way that they know how. Molly, do you see any other questions we've
There's one about
missed?
what happens if you do have family that's nearby the university you want to study at. Obviously, that is common. That happens. It's just being able to articulate why you're choosing that university. So you should not be relying on the fact that your family's there. That should be like yes, I do have family that's located there, but this is the reason why I'm attending this university or why I want to attend. It's the program, it's the location, I want to do this with my education, and I feel like this is the best place for me to be able to do it. So very clearly understand your university, because if you're speaking more to the family connection than you are to the academic experience, that's going to be a really easy way for the officer to say, well, it looks like you're not really interested in the academic experience. So just be prepared to be able to speak more about the university and why you feel like that's a good fit for you.
Absolutely. And it looks like we did get to kind of one of the codes in the recent visa rejection. It's a 214B, which is the violation of non-immigrant intent. So hopefully the things that you've heard here this morning/evening have been helpful in understanding, maybe in reflecting on your individual experience, what might have been a red flag, as we said, for the consular officer, and how you can go about being more successful in a second interview. Um, University of North Texas. Oh, that's great. Uh, Impact on my visa. Molly touched on that. Yes. So just understanding that even if you have family in the area, that you aren't going to, even if you do plan to live with them, but that you're not going to rely on them for everything, that you are an independent individual who is going to be a student, and focus on your studies and things like that. And if that is part of your financial fit, then making that extremely clear is a critical part of making sure that you don't raise a red flag for that non-immigrant intent, for that 214B rejection reason. Let's see. So we've got a question in here that I want to kind of point out. So it looks like a student is planning to prepare for a visa interview, and has asked for like a copy of the questions that are asked. It's good to feel prepared, but as we've said, each interview is an individual experience. So over preparing for questions that someone else was asked may not make you the best prepared for the questions you'll be asked. It's best to follow the general advice, the knowing your story, the academic, the financial, and the social fit that Molly mentioned throughout is really critical. So you should be prepared to answer any question if you understand how to talk about those things. I think we have answered all of the questions. Molly, are you seeing any that I glazed over?
No, it looked like a lot of the other things that were in there were kind of similar in nature and things that we've already touched on, which is great. Um, but yeah, thank you to everyone for being so active and engaged and asking those questions.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been really wonderful. Hopefully, you found it enlightening, helpful. If you have any questions remaining, please reach out to our AECC offices. We have, I believe, 26 across India and many more throughout South and Southeast Asia as well. So please reach out, get the help that you need. Hopefully, this provided a nice, strong foundation for you and you're feeling more confident. Molly, thank you so much for meeting with us and spending some of your Saturday helping students prepare for their journey to study in the US. We so appreciate it.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for allowing me to join, and especially in partnership with AECC. It's such a reputable company that is able to support students and families so thoroughly. So thank you all for making time to join us today.
Well, excellent. Well, thank you all again and have a lovely rest of your evening. Molly, enjoy your day and everyone take good care.